Genocide. The Johnson administration is now pressing the U.S. Senate to ratify the UN Genocide Convention, which Truman first submitted to the Senate 17 years ago, and which the Senate refused to ratify because of strong public opposition. Now, apparently, the administration thinks the people have forgotten or do not care. It is horrifying to contemplate the destructive effects which the Genocide Convention could have on the American constitutional system if the Senate should ever ratify it, thus making it supreme law of our land. This document, written by international communists and socialists, would have no effect in communist countries, but would set aside our constitutional protections, giving communists and all other American haters in foreign lands the color of international law for intervening in our domestic affairs and punishing American individuals who incur the wrath of the enemies of our country. That is a summary of my report on genocide. The full report after a message from my sponsor. Arthur Goldberg, U.S. Ambassador to the UN, told a meeting of the American Jewish Committee in Washington that the Johnson administration will press the U.S. Senate for the immediate ratification of the Genocide Convention and 3 other UN treaties. The sleeping dogs of the communist socialist revolution never really sleep. They just lie in ambush, ready to pounce when they think they see an advantage, taking small bites now and then if they cannot get what they want all at once, but never discarding their ultimate objective, worldwide socialist dictatorship. The Genocide Convention has been before the Senate awaiting ratification for 17 years. Genocide means killing a tribe or race of people. Convention means an international agreement or treaty. The UN General Assembly passed the Genocide Convention on December 9, 1948. The Truman State Department approved and signed the document, but that did not constitute formal U.S. ratification. Under our Constitution, the Senate must ratify before the United States formally becomes a party to a treaty, bound to uphold its purposes and enforce its provisions upon the people. Under the false but prevailing constitutional interpretation, a treaty to which we are a party becomes supreme law of our land, overriding, where there is conflict, local, state, and federal laws, all state constitutions, and the federal Constitution. Truman submitted the Genocide Convention to the Senate for ratification in 1949, but public opposition was strong, and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee took no action. After Eisenhower's election had crippled the anti-communist, anti-socialist movement in this country, internationalists renewed their efforts for Senate ratification of the Genocide Convention. Again, the public emphatically said no. And in 1953, Eisenhower's Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, said the Genocide Convention could better be reconsidered at a later date. For 13 more years, the Genocide Convention lay dormant in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. President Kennedy asked the Senate to ratify 3 UN conventions on human rights. Acceptance of these would have been stepping stones toward acceptance of the Genocide Convention, which is the one internationalists want above all others. The public was not yet fully conditioned. So the Senate Foreign Relations Committee refused to act on the UN human rights treaties Kennedy wanted, and Kennedy did not even ask the committee to reconsider genocide. Now, apparently, internationalist stage managers think the time is ripe. It is significant that Chief Justice Earl Warren introduced Ambassador Goldberg for the speech in which Goldberg said the Johnson administration will press for immediate Senate ratification of the Genocide Convention. If the convention is ratified, its destructive effects on the American constitutional system will doubtless be approved by the Supreme Court. Consider what could happen if the Senate should ratify the Genocide Convention, thus making it supreme law in the United States. Suppose a Negro or any person who could be identified as belonging to a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group is duly tried, convicted, sentenced, and executed for committing a heinous crime in some state where there is capital punishment. Obviously, this killing of a member of a racial group is an international crime as defined in Provision A of Article 2 of the Genocide Convention. Article 4 of the Convention says that public officials can be prosecuted for genocide. Article 3 says that complicity in genocide is punishable. Consequently, every law enforcement official who had anything to do with the arrest and detention of the executed criminal, every person who gave information that helped police find and arrest the criminal, every witness against him, the judge and jury of the trial court that found him guilty, the prosecuting attorney and his assistants, participating members of any appellate court that denied the criminal's appeal or affirmed his conviction, the state governor who signed the order of execution, persons who participated in the official act of execution, all could be prosecuted for the international crime of genocide. If Congress passed laws providing for such prosecution, the Supreme Court would doubtless uphold the laws as deriving their authority from a treaty obligation of the United States. If Congress did not pass laws providing for the prosecution of genocide, accused persons could be extradited and sent abroad for prosecution before the World Court. Suppose the convicted criminal was not executed but merely sentenced to prison. All private persons and public officials who participated in his arrest, trial, and incarceration could be prosecuted under Provision B of Article 2 of the Genocide Convention for having caused or helped cause, quote, serious bodily or mental harm to a member of a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, end quote. Speaking or writing critically of anyone identifiable as a member of a group mentioned in the Genocide Convention could be considered as causing mental harm, thus constituting the crime of genocide. Practically every communist in the world could identify himself as a member of one or more of the groups protected by the Genocide Convention. Hence, any American who criticized Castro, Gus Hall, Kosygin, or any other communist anywhere could be prosecuted for genocide. Criticizing agitators who are creating criminal anarchy and trying to incite racial civil war in the United States could be construed as genocide. Many passages in the Bible are critical of specific racial or religious groups. Conceivably, any person quoting such scripture could be prosecuted for genocide. Some 20 states in our union have sterilization laws, giving courts authority to order sterilization in lieu of prison sentences for lawbreakers who are feeble-minded or otherwise unfit for procreating normal children. All officials acting under terms of these laws could be prosecuted under Provision D of Article 2 of the Genocide Convention for, quote, imposing measures intended to prevent births within one of the groups protected by the treaty. The same charges could be brought against all who help provide birth control instructions, devices, or medicines to members of groups specified in the Genocide Convention. You think none of this could happen here? Consider something that has happened. Shortly after the UN General Assembly passed the Genocide Convention in 1948, the Civil Rights Congress, a notorious communist front in the United States, made a formal complaint before the United Nations, accusing the United States of Negro genocide, charging the United States with willful creation of conditions making for premature death, poverty, and disease among Negroes because some Negroes live in slums. No action was ever taken on the ludicrous complaint, but the fact of its filing is a grim harbinger of things that could come if the Senate ever ratifies the Genocide Convention. The Genocide Convention grew out of the war crimes trials against Nazi leaders following World War II. Ostensibly, these trials proved that Nazis had systematically murdered millions of Jews in an effort to eradicate Jews as a racial and religious group. Presumably, the convention is intended to outlaw such horrible practice. All communist delegates in the UN voted for passage of the Genocide Convention in 1948. All signed it and formally ratified it. Yet, the communists had more genocidal blood on their hands than Nazis ever had. To solidify their dictatorship in Russia, the Soviets exterminated millions of individuals. To prepare for post-war conquest and control of Poland, the Soviets committed the Katyn forest massacres, which wiped out a substantial portion of the officer and leadership classes in Poland. Mass murders for political reasons are standard practice in communist countries, but they are not punishable under the Genocide Convention. The Genocide Convention does not protect economic and political groups. Communist governments do not murder people for national, ethnical, racial, or religious reasons. They commit mass murders as punishment for what they call political and economic crimes. Hence, the murders are not genocide as defined in the Genocide Convention. Moreover, communist countries are closed societies, which means that information leading to charges of genocide against individuals or government officials in communist countries is not available, as it is in nations where there is some freedom of press and freedom of speech. The upshot is that the UN treaty to outlaw genocide exempts communist governments, the only entities in the world which actually exterminate whole groups of people. Hence, it is easy to see why communist governments support the convention. It in no way affects their bloody pogroms against their own people. But it could, if the United States became a party to it, give communists and all other American haters in foreign lands the color of international law for intervening in our domestic affairs and punishing American individuals who incur the wrath of the enemies of our country. I suggest that you write both United States senators from your state, imploring them to help defeat ratification, not only of the Genocide Convention, but of all other United Nations human rights conventions. Another thing that I suggest you do is to keep yourself as well informed as you can and to try to alert others. Public understanding of what is going on is absolutely necessary if we are to hold back the socialist revolution. For self-information, you might try a trial subscription to my report, $3 for 3 months. For the published report on which this broadcast is based, send 25 cents to Dan Smoot, Dallas 14, Texas, and ask for 571, Genocide. 10 copies, $1. This is Dan Smoot. Goodbye. God bless you.